turnout, everybody go out and vote, I think is very, can tip the balance. I told them, it's important to go out to vote for people.
That was West Valley City Council member Tom Nguyen talking to ABC4 News back in March about the significance of the Asian American vote in Utah. Thanks for staying with us for tonight's In Focus discussion, Getting Out the Minority Vote. Joining us tonight is Emilio Manuel Camu, the immediate past president of OCA Utah, and Grace Cunningham with the Salt Lake Equal Rights Movement and Utah Black Democrats. Welcome, both of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, Emilio, I want to start with you. What is the data on voter turnout with Utah's AAPI community?
Right, so there's 145,000 plus Asian Pacific Islanders in the state of Utah. Out of all of those, 75,000 are eligible voters. And within that number, 61,000 reside in Salt Lake County alone. From 2000 to 2020, we saw a 128% increase, so more than double of our population in Utah. And more so than ever, they're ready to vote.
Wow, those numbers are pretty cool and surprising to some. Grace, let's go to you. What are some voter barriers that our Black or African American communities face, or what are some things that discourages them from voting?
I think one of the biggest things is the majority of Black people in Utah are Democrats, and we do live in a red state, so we feel like our voices won't be heard.
Emilio, what about you? What do you think some things might discourage or keep members of our Asian American community and Pacific Islander communities from voting?
Well, 70% of our Asian Pacific Islander community speak a language other than English, so definitely in-language access, and in-language access while voting is very important. So if anyone out there needs support while voting or just needs to know what the processes are, they can call 1-888-API-VOTE. That's the National Asian Pacific Islander Voter Hotline. Some of the other things that there are to consider is that not all Asian Pacific Islanders can vote. There are undocumented Asian Pacific Islanders that do exist. There's also people who were born in the Federated States of Micronesia, American Samoa, and the Marshall Islands who are ineligible to vote. So we're really trying to encourage people to vote and to be invested in their communities by being involved in different community organizations.
Yeah, that reminds me, when I was filling out my ballot, there were a lot of things I had to research, right? Spend time to get more information of. And I'm sitting there thinking of my mom, so I immediately called my mom and I said, Mom, what do you think when you're filling out your ballot? And she's just like, I have to sit there with my dictionary to find out what this means. And I'm just like, wow, that's really a barrier that our communities of colors are facing. So Grace, let's talk about what are some of the outreach efforts that have been done to help improve voter turnout.
Well, over the summer, our organizations have been having tons of events. At every single one, we make sure everybody's registered to vote. If they're not, we go ahead and send them the link so they can do so. We've also been going out and making sure our unsheltered brothers and sisters are registered to vote as well.
Yeah, that first step is so crucial. Amelia, what about OCA Utah? What have you guys been doing?
So before the pandemic, we really focused historically on town halls, parties, karaoke, to really get people interested in voting. But now, after that, we've really relied on our partnerships with organizations like the National Tongan American Society, the Asian Association of Utah, and the Utah Pacific Islander Civic Engagement Coalition to really get out the word to vote. Most recently, we've been tabling at different Asian-owned grocery stores like Chinatown Supermarket, Ocean Mart, Kim Long, Taido, to be able to register people out to vote.
I really commend you guys because you guys are dedicating your own free time, right, to do all of these outreaches, these town halls, these tabling. I really commend you guys for doing so. Amelia, you touched a little bit on the pandemic. I do want to talk about how things have been now that the pandemic is here. How hard has it been since then, since the pandemic started?
Well, really difficult because 14% of our API population live below the poverty line. So it's addressing pandemic EBT, it's addressing food insecurity, it's addressing housing, especially for isolation and quarantining API. Pacific Islanders are the hardest hit in terms of rate of hospitalization and of infection for the COVID-19 disease. So for us, it's really being able to support the efforts of other community organizations like the Utah Pacific Islander Health Coalition, and really trying to stop the spread of pandemic in our communities.
I feel like it's just adding to your list, right, of things to do. Our needs of communities of color, they expand every time we're dealing with disasters. Little did we know we'd be dealing with a worldwide pandemic. Being one of the organizations with boots on the ground to tackle this topic, Amelia, what are some things that you've heard or observations that you've had firsthand about the needs of the AAPI community?
Well, again, it's addressing the food insecurity, it's the housing, it's all of these different things that have existed before the pandemic even began, but is now highlighted and really focused in during the time of the pandemic. But I mean, people are really excited right now to be civically engaged. What I've heard from so many people, my friends who are alumni from the different colleges here, they're really excited not just to vote, but to get involved and invest and commit lifelong to the betterment of our API communities.
I agree. All right, Emilio and Grace, I want you guys to hold that thought real quick. We have to take a short commercial break, but when we return, we continue our In Focus discussion tonight on turning out the minority vote.
You can't influence change if your voice isn't heard, and in America, that is how our voice is heard in most larger stadiums.
That was Alicia Derso, the executive director of Curly Me, back in March, talking about the importance of Black and African American voter turnout in our local elections. Welcome back to our third and final segment of our In Focus topic tonight, turning out the minority vote. Before the break, Emilio Manuel Camu, the immediate past president of OCA Utah, and Grace Cunningham with the Salt Lake Equal Rights Movement and Utah Black Democrats joined us for a live discussion. We pick up right where we left off. Grace, we're going to start with you this time. What can our community and local leaders do to help with better voter turnout?
I think making sure that there is representation from every demographic, and as well as having civic engagement go further than the election.
Emilio, what are some of the voting topics or political issues that our AAPI community care about?
I think definitely immigration, education, healthcare. A lot of our people work in those different fields, and so it's really important for us, for the future president, to be able to address that.
Grace, what about our Black and African American community in Utah, as far as important issues go?
I definitely feel like we need more funding in all aspects of our community, especially our school system.
With voter outreach, Emilio, are you guys advocating for anything else, such as like filling out the census form to increase representation for your community?
Yeah, so in pairing with our voter outreach efforts, we did census outreach as well, because people would have questions about any and all of those. Additionally, we've been a partner for the COVID-19 Community Partnership Program with the Utah Department of Health, and working with community health workers specifically tasked with working with the Asian community and making sure that they're receiving information on free COVID-19 testing, as well as most recently getting their flu shots. And in addition to that, we're just making sure that they're continuously involved in local efforts. So we're continuing our education campaign, making sure that we're tackling anti-Black racism within our communities, and making sure that we're understanding the history of our immigration and our immigration patterns for APIs here in the state.
Grace, what about you guys? Anything else that you guys are doing alongside with your voter outreach?
Just making sure that everybody's filling out the census. I think for us, that's the most important thing, making sure we have representation.
What are the consequences, Emilio, when our AAPI community members don't vote?
Then we don't have representation in the places that we need them in. I think, within the past 5 years, we saw the first Asian American in the House of Representatives, Representative Karen Kwan, who then have now mentored other folks to be able to run for office. And then I think, when people don't vote, or when people don't become engaged in our communities, then that's talent that's being lost within our communities, and people who aren't necessarily invested. So when people aren't involved and when people aren't voting, it becomes this cycle, right, of, oh no, we don't have representation. Oh no, we can't do anything. Oh no, we're not using our voice. And so for us, that's why it's important to advocate for voting and lifelong commitment to bettering our communities.
Grace, chime in on this. Emilio talked about how Representative Karen Kwan, right, is the only Asian American representative. We think about Representative Sandra Hollins, right? She's the only Black/African American representation in the House as well. So chime in on this. What's the consequence in our Black and African American local communities when they don't go out and vote?
Just like Emilio said, we're not getting representation that we need, and people that may not have our best interest in mind are getting elected.
What do your guys' organizations plan to do after the election's over? Emilio, Emilio, when I think of you, you're so involved with everything. I'm just like, how does Emilio sleep? But let's talk about OCA, maybe talk about some of the other organizations you're working with voter outreach. What are you guys gonna do after the election's over?
I mean, we're here, we're invested again in the lifelong commitment and bettering our community. So we're here to nurture each other. We're here to feed each other. Hopefully when the buffets open back up, we can eat with each other. But other than that, we want to continue to plan hosting workshops, panels, online discussions to make sure that if our community members aren't maybe necessarily feeling up to the task of being the director, being the organizer, then they're here to learn, to better ourselves and our community, and to share that education with other folks who may not have necessarily been involved. We're not just targeting youth here. We want an intergenerational movement and mobilizing every part of our Asian Pacific Islander communities.
Yeah, my mom misses the buffet so much. So I'm sure as she's watching this, she's like, yes, Emilio, can't wait till the buffets open back up whenever that may be. Grace, let's talk about your organizations. You're involved in at least two. What are you guys going to do after the election's over?
So with Salt Lake Equal Rights Movement, our biggest focus after the election is continuing the fight for Black liberation. We believe that once Black people are liberated, all marginalized groups will be as well.
And that's, that's a long fight. That's not something that we're going to be able to accomplish in a day, right? In a month or in years. And it's kind of something that we all have to join hands in to help one another out. I feel like one of my friends, Marlon Lynch, he says it best. We all need each other to survive. All right, let's talk about last thoughts. What do you guys want to say to people about the election? Maybe if people from your own communities are watching tonight, maybe if they haven't casted their ballots yet, they've hesitated. What would you say to them tonight as a final message? And Emilio, we'll start with you.
I mean, please vote. Get out and vote, but also make sure that aside from that, you're doing more than just voting to make sure that you're committed and invested in the betterment of our communities. Asian liberation, Pacific Islander liberation is ultimately tied to Black liberation. So we have to support each other. We have to lean into each other to make sure that our communities are being heard and that we're doing the action necessary to make sure that we achieve justice and equity for all.
All right, we have about 30 seconds left. Real quick, if there's people at home who want to reach out to you guys for help, for community support, real quick, tell our viewers at home how they can get a hold of you, and Grace, we'll start with you.
You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, at Salt Lake Equal Rights Movement or Slurm, Utah.
All right, and what about you, Emilio?
At OCA UTAH on Instagram and or OCA Asian Pacific Islander American Advocates Utah on Facebook. OCAUtah.org.
Grace, Emilio, you guys are so great. Folks, you've been hearing from Emilio Manuel Camu, the immediate past president of OCA, and Grace Cunningham with the Salt Lake Equal Rights Movement and Utah Black Democrats. Guys, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Salamat.
Thank you.